Over the course of their 39 films spread across 26 years, DreamWorks has displayed that they have wide range when it comes to creating and adapting unique worlds. Sure, it doesn't always work out for them, but for every Boss Baby and Shark Tale, there's 3 How to Train Your Dragons and 3 Kung Fu Pandas. And then in between all that, there's a few fantastic hidden gems that fly under the radar and don't really bloom until later, like Megamind or Rise of the Guardians. Well, what if I told you that 2013's The Croods should be one of them? Now, I know what you're thinking, the Nicolas Cage Grug Moment movie, and just hear me out. I know a lot of people saw the movie, it made over $500 million at the box office, but I don't think anyone really watched it. I've seen a lot of reviews for the movie floating around, but not only are all of them incredibly short, but a majority of them spend most of the time going over the history of the movie and how it came to be, rather than talking about the movie itself. Even when it comes to all the recent DreamWorks rankings and countdown videos that have been popping up lately, The Croods is always the movie that gets brushed aside as nothing more than meh the most. But the thing is, even other meh animated films like Illumination's Sing or the recent Pixar sequels still have video essays and reviews describing why they are meh. But The Croods literally has nothing. I mean, it did come out the same year as Despicable Me 2 with more minions and Frozen with Let It Go, so I can understand how it got drowned out some. But does this movie really have nothing to talk about, or has nobody ever given it a fair chance? Well, it's time for The Croods to get an in-depth analysis so we can finally find out.
Ta-da!
The movie opens up on a cute 2D animated scene where one of our main characters, Eep, explains where she lives with her family and what it's like. All the dangers outside, what happened to all their neighbors, and the house rules which Eep is not too fond of. And this is where we are immediately beaten over the head with the movie's message, as the house rules are curiosity is bad, anything new is bad, and so on and so forth. More or less than subtle things. But I don't think the lack of subtlety in the movie's message is exactly a negative thing. It can and has been done well before, like with Wreck-It Ralph, which literally opens up with a Villains Anonymous meeting about the moral of the story. They even stand in a circle, hold hands, and have a whole pledge about it. And I think The Croods does a good job with it too. The characters don't just at random blurt out that maybe they should try something new every now and then. And instead, it's only really implied when Grug has to tell his hilariously bad and predictable stories or reinforce the house rules when his family breaks them. So it's less like the movie's hammering in its moral and more like it just refuses to mask it under a layer of subtlety, which I think fits with the simplistic caveman. So the 2D segment ends and we go to a really fun morning hunting scene where we're introduced to Grug, the rest of the family, and get a taste of their personalities. Eep, as previously established, is the Disney princess-like character who has to deal with her father's restrictive rules even though she wants more in life. And Grug is the strict father who enforces these rules so his family can stay safe and alive. So yeah, there's a conflict there, and the movie actually does a fantastic job of helping you see both sides. You want Eep to get that freedom and space she desires because Grug's rules are super duper strict, but you also understand why the rules are so strict and why Grug enforces them so hard because you actually get to see the dangers and threats in the world. Outside of these two though, there's not much else to talk about when it comes to the rest of the family. There's Uga, Grug's wife, who serves as sort of a buffer or voice of reason when Grug and Eep are going at each other. There's Thunk, which is just the dumb brother trope. There's Sandy, the animalistic toddler. And then there's the grandma, who follows that wisecracking tough old lady trope that thankfully never gets old because it's genuinely hilarious. And even though the rest of the family doesn't exactly have much to say about them or any development at all, they still serve purposes in forwarding the plot and in Grug and Eep's development. A quick example would be after we meet a character later on called Guy, played by Ryan Reynolds. Throughout the movie, we witness each family member slowly turning over and listening to Guy more than they listen to Grug. And it shifts Grug's perspective each time it happens, and eventually hits a breaking point when Thunk, the most loyal and unquestioning of his rules, switches over too. So even though they're not as interesting as Grug or Eep, the family still contributes here and there to the story and still has reason to be there beyond just the fact that they're family.
Oh, let's do it again. I think I blinked.
Anyways, back to this Guy character. Eep meets him one rebellious night and he warns about the potential end of their world, which of course ends up coming true. And I actually really appreciate this Guy character because there were so many tropes that he could have fallen into, but he manages to avoid every single last one of them. He could have just been the generic pretty boy and love interest for Eep, but he's very much his own character. He has his own motivations, his own goal, and his and Eep's relationship develops naturally and they have good chemistry instead of being a generic love at first sight story, even though it appears to be that way at first. He also brings the whole Croods family on his journey with him and genuinely has their best interests in mind, and not just because they're attached to Eep. The second trope he could have fallen into is just being a flawless character who can magic his way through the plot and gain everyone's approval in an instant. But nope, the Croods keep him as their prisoner at first and only start to listen to him when they get stuck and are absolutely forced to. He also has his own moments of vulnerability and times where he doesn't know what to do either. So he manages to avoid being a Mr. Perfect. He also avoids that super annoying and generic caveman trope of inventing modern technology out of caveman stuff, like the Flintstones does making TVs out of rocks or showers out of animals. In fact, the movie as a whole does a pretty good job at avoiding that trope. The only time it really happens is in a 2-minute montage where it directly parodies and makes fun of it, where Grug creates hilariously and increasingly terrible inventions to impress his family the way Guy does. Anything Guy or the movie creates and invents outside of that is survivalist stuff that cavemen really would have come up with. Signals to alert each other, umbrellas to protect from the rain, stilts to get across canyons, and even shoes, all of which I'm sure are not considered modern technology. So yeah, this guy, I approve. Anyways, the world ends, and the Croods are forced to explore their new surroundings during the day as they look for a place to hunker down. Unfortunately, they don't find a place by nightfall and have to face the terrors of the dark. This is where Guy comes in, meets the family, and saves them all. When morning comes, the Croods realize that they can't survive the nightfall without Guy's fire, and so they decide to capture him and bring him along on their road trip to find a new cave. And this is where people start to groan. Ugh, another family road trip movie. But if you look at the time, we're already about 40 minutes in, and the road trip is pretty much over by the 1 hour and 6 minute mark. We only have to really go through about 25 minutes of road trip, and that's not even a third of the movie. There's plenty that happens before and after. Not to mention, the road trip itself isn't just filler, there's plenty it does to further the plot and development of the characters. We get some bonding moments to flesh out Guy's and Eep's relationship, we see the family open up and trust Guy more, and we even get a scene where the family gets split up and has to figure things out on their own for the very first time. And then there's also the fact that they're not just trying to get somewhere, but also trying to get away from somewhere, as the end of the world is quickly approaching. But even though it's quickly approaching, let's take a detour and discuss some other aspects of the movie. The animation of this movie is overall breathtaking, except those few times with the lighting of the fire where they got a bit too ambitious and it looks fine against the environments but not against the characters and instead makes them look like they're made of plastic. But overall breathtaking. The environments are super rich and lush with detail, it's so colorful and vibrant everywhere. The character designs and creature designs are all super duper unique, and all the textures look fantastic. It's not just pretty to look at in still frames though. The character animation in this movie is some of my favorite in any animated movie. Every character is so expressive and is always doing something interesting, even when they're in the background and not in the focal point. One of my favorite little animated segments in the movie is when Grug and the rest of Eep's family first discover fire, and Grug is trying to manage his family and keep them from touching it. Pushing them back, pulling them away, turning them around, all with his Neanderthal-like movements. It's just fun to watch. And thanks to the top-notch character animation, it benefits the movie's humor a lot. That humor being slapstick comedy. Characters get crushed with rocks, thrown around, it's a caveman movie, what do you expect? The rest of the jokes in the movie are still passable, so even if you're not into physical comedy, you'll still get a few chuckles out here and there, even if there's nothing too outrageously hilarious for you. But of course, comedy is subjective. Some people think the Three Stooges are lowbrow, and some think they're comedy wizards. If you think they're comedy wizards, then this movie will absolutely be a riot for you. If you're not into the humor, there's still plenty left in the movie for you. Between all the unga bunga caveman moments, there's some genuinely breathtaking and heartwarming scenes. The movie gives you plenty of moments to take in the gorgeous environments, listen to the amazing soundtrack, and feel all the characters' emotions. And they play all these scenes completely straight and serious too. If Thunk says anything, it's not something dumb and stupid to get a cheap laugh. Sandy doesn't make random baby animal noises. The movie often exposes that it has a lot of heart, and it gives you plenty of opportunities to soak it all in. But enough gushing over the presentation. Let's get back to the end.
And I'm calling this one a lifterator.
Mom? I know, it's bad.
So the road trip has come to a close and the Croods are nearing their destination, but the end of the world is approaching a lot faster than they can get away, so they need to hurry. Unfortunately though, this fear causes Grug's instincts to take over and he heads for the first cave he sees. And this is the breaking point where his family absolutely refuses to follow him any longer. So this is where Grug has to make a choice. He can either accept that his rules don't apply in this world and follow Guy like everyone else, or he can succumb to caveman rage. He succumbs to caveman rage. Grug gets big mad, chases Guy down the mountain, and accidentally gets both of them caught in a tar pit. Now that he can't move or take his anger out on Guy, he's absolutely forced to listen, which I think works a lot better for his stubborn character. Guy opens up, reveals his story for Grug, and explains why he's trying to get so hard to this mysterious tomorrow. And now that Grug is forced to listen, he totally gets it and regrets not doing so earlier. So the two make up, find a way out of the tar pit, and proceed as planned. Unfortunately, because of Grug's outburst though, they end up a few seconds too late. And even though he's redeemed himself because the delay was his fault, Grug still has to face the consequences and stay behind. He throws Guy and the rest of his family across the molten gap to safety, and then takes shelter in a cave as the mountain collapses. Now Grug is on his own to put everything he learned in his character arc to the test. He can either sit in that cave and continue to mope, or he can try to have a new idea. And thankfully he chooses the much better option this time, as not only does he find a way for himself to escape, but he also helps a bunch of innocent, harmless animals escape too. Well, maybe not harmless, but still innocent. Anyways, this plan works and he reunites with his family. Grug and Eep make amends, Grug accepts Guy into the family, and now all the Croods are ready to take on anything new that comes their way. And that was 2013's The Croods from DreamWorks Animation. Now, was it an absolute true masterpiece like Prince of Egypt and How to Train Your Dragon? Of course not. The movie still has its fair share of flaws. For example, even though the family outside of Grug, Guy, and Eep still contribute to the plot and their development, it still doesn't change the fact that they're not too interesting themselves. None of the movie's scenes felt like filler, but I do think there were some moments here and there that went on a bit too long. They try to force some kind of antagonist with this wildcat that keeps hunting them down, but the end of the world is already threatening enough as it is, so it's not really needed. And finally, if you're not into physical comedy, the humor isn't exactly for you, even if it manages to get a couple chuckles out of you here and there. So, it's not a true masterpiece. Is it still good, or even great? Absolutely! It has a very unique and creative world that we don't see in many animated movies these days, and it takes full advantage of the setting that it's in. The visuals are gorgeous to look at, the soundtrack is amazing to listen to, our main characters are very interesting and pick up the slack of those that weren't. I think it's a genuinely great movie still, up there with Megamind, the first Shrek, and the other high-tier DreamWorks movies. Again, it's not a top-tier masterpiece, but it's definitely high-tier. Although, now that I've analyzed it, I kinda do understand why it flew under the radar, aside from the year that it released. The movie has a lot of red flags warning about potential tropes. The girl character who has to deal with a strict dad and just wants more in life. The family road trip movie. The super modern caveman. The bland pretty boy love interest. Oh, and there's Belt. He has a chipmunk voice. Reminds me of the Minions. The entire movie just waves a buttload of red flags and makes the viewers go, oh boy, and tune out before they see that every single one of these red flags is false, as the tropes are either subverted or just executed really well. And as for the people who talk about these during their DreamWorks rankings and countdowns, The Croods is towards the end of the lineup, so they're just drained and wanting to get it over with. Work is work, and it makes things less fun no matter what you're doing, even if that thing is watching movies. But now that I've given it the video essay it deserves, perhaps you and everyone else will finally give it another chance. And you still may think it's meh, but that's okay, it just needs a chance. The Croods is a true hidden gem.
The end.
Dun, dun, dun.
The Croods 2, however, is not that. It is every ounce the mediocre mush everyone was pretending the first movie was, with an extra few cups of chaotic fever dream mixed in. All the red flags this movie has turn out to be very true and more. The movie's moral looks like it's going to be ridiculously hammered in. Yep, this time it is, with chocolate-covered speeches blurted out of nowhere. The side characters that were uninteresting but still useful in the first film, now they're just uninteresting, with a side of annoying too. Oh, Grandma, what did they do to you? A generic family film with an aimless plot that feels like it's made up as it goes along? It's actually two of those in one! And worst of all, they ruined Guy. Now he's the generic pretty boy love interest. The movie isn't all bad though. Guy's and Eep's relationship is still fun to watch because I'm just a sucker for that generic, mushy, gooey, lovey cheese, and they turn it up to an almost comedic level. And the moral of the movie, while hammered in, is still very much a good one, about not moving forward without remembering where you came from. A moral that is very much the opposite of the first movie, but not in a conflicting way. The humor I also found to be a lot more well-rounded than the first movie, instead of depending on whether or not you like physical comedy. And the animation is gorgeous. I know with an almost 8-year gap between movies, there was of course going to be some improvement, but this was a lot more than I was expecting. And hey, the lighting of the fire looks good against the characters this time. Now this is gonna be pretty out there for me to say, but I actually think this is the best looking animated film that we have so far. Yeah, I'm sure Toy Story 4 had more realistic clothing or carpet textures, and Finding Dory probably had more realistic water. But realism aside, in terms of general art style, how lush, vibrant, and creative the environments are, how expressive and energetic the character animations are, it's hard to find an animated movie that looks any better, even if that animation was used to give us some of the most uncomfortable scenes of all time. But hey, out of it, we also got one of the best animated characters in cinematic history, Phil Betterman.
Huh? No bananas? Huh?
For every second this character's on screen, you just have an absolute goldmine of screenshot opportunities for the most ridiculous facial expressions you'll find in an animated movie. And he's just such a snarky snob, it's ridiculous. He has non-stop energy coursing through his veins. I don't think anyone could have brought him to life better than Peter Dinklage. Whoever animated this man needs an absolute raise. They're going places. Like, again, the movie is mediocre at best, but every single good quality it has can be found in Phil Betterman's character. Since I am a Crash Bandicoot-centered channel, for my fellow Crash fans that are out there, Phil Betterman is the equivalent of Cortex in Twinsanity. He is absolutely carrying this movie. Okay, that's enough for now. All in all, again, one more time, The Croods 2: A New Age is in fact a mediocre movie, and it works as a perfect example of what people think the first movie is when they don't give it a chance. So definitely go back and watch 2013's The Croods to see what I mean. You're missing out on a fantastic movie. Despite this chaotic sequel, it still remains a hidden gem.
Just bananas! Just bananas, she says! That was my one rule!